My husband threw tantrums for months, slammed a sauce jar so hard it cracked, flipped the coffee table, and his mom said, "Boys will be boys." So I threw bigger ones back. I married Nathan after dating for 2 years, and everything was great until we moved in together. We had this nice little duplex with a big kitchen and a backyard where I grew tomatoes and peppers. Nathan worked from home doing consulting, and I worked at the veterinary clinic downtown. We split everything down the middle and took turns cooking dinner. Life was good until about 3 months after the wedding when I saw who Nathan really was. We were at the grocery store and I grabbed the wrong brand of pasta sauce. Nathan grabbed the jar from my hand and slammed it back on the shelf so hard it cracked. The store employee just stared at us. Nathan said the sauce had too much sugar and walked off like nothing happened. I bought the sauce anyway because we needed it for dinner. When we got home, Nathan saw the jar in the bag and threw it in the trash. Then he made himself a sandwich and went to his office. After that, the tantrums started happening all the time. If I bought the wrong coffee creamer, he'd pour the whole bottle down the sink while I was watching. If I forgot to record his show, he'd unplug the TV and carry it to the garage. If dinner wasn't ready when he wanted it, he'd take every pot and pan out of the cabinet and stack them on the counter. The worst was when I came home late from an emergency surgery at the clinic. Nathan had thrown every single pillow and blanket from our bed into the bathtub and turned on the shower. He said if I couldn't be home on time, I didn't deserve a comfortable bed. I slept on the couch that night while he sprawled across our king-size mattress. My friend Lisa kept telling me to leave, but I wanted to handle this myself first. Nathan had this whole routine where he'd throw his fit, storm off to his office, then come back an hour later acting like nothing happened. He'd ask what was for dinner or if I wanted to watch a movie. If I brought up what he did, he'd say I was being sensitive and making a big deal over nothing. One time I tried to talk to him about it calmly, and he threw his coffee mug at the wall. Not near me, but close enough that I jumped. Then he said I was being dramatic about a little noise. His mom came to visit and I tried to tell her what was happening. She watched Nathan flip the coffee table because I forgot to buy his protein bars, and she said boys will be boys. She actually said that. Then she told me her husband used to break plates when he was stressed and it was my job to keep Nathan happy. That's when I realized nobody was going to fix this but me. So I started matching his energy. When Nathan threw the remote at the wall because the game was buffering, I picked up his gaming headset and launched it out the back door into the garden. He ran outside and spent an hour looking for it in the dark. When he poured out my expensive shampoo because I took too long in the shower, I took his entire shelf of supplements and protein powder and dumped them in the kitchen trash. He had to dig through coffee grounds and old food to get them back. When he knocked all my makeup off the bathroom counter because I left a hair in the sink, I went to his office and swept everything off his desk onto the floor. His laptop survived, but his coffee went everywhere. Nathan started getting confused. He'd throw his tantrum and wait for me to clean up or apologize, but instead I'd throw a bigger one. He threw a book at the door. I threw 3. He slammed cabinets. I slammed them harder. He started yelling that I was crazy and out of control. I yelled back that I was just expressing my feelings as he did. The breaking point came when Nathan's boss called him for an important video meeting. Nathan was in his office, and I was in the kitchen making lunch. I accidentally dropped a pan, and Nathan came storming out screaming about the noise. So I grabbed every pan we owned and started dropping them one by one. Nathan's face turned this deep red color that started at his neck and spread up to his hairline. His laptop screen showed his boss Winston's face frozen mid-question, and I could hear the tinny voice coming through the speakers asking what all that noise was about. Nathan slammed the laptop shut so hard I thought the screen might crack. He started walking toward me with his hands balled up into fists at his sides, and for a second I thought about backing up or apologizing or doing something to defuse the situation like I always did. But I was still holding that big cast iron skillet in my hand, and something in me just refused to move. Nathan stopped about 3 feet away from me, and we just stared at each other while he breathed really hard through his nose. I could see something different in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Something that looked almost like fear. Like he suddenly realized I wasn't going to back down this time. He opened his mouth like he was going to yell at me, but nothing came out. Then he spun around and punched the hallway wall so hard his fist went straight through the drywall. The sound was this awful crunch, and then he was shaking his hand and cursing, and he walked straight to his office and slammed the door so hard the whole duplex shook. I heard the lock click from where I was standing in the kitchen. I put the pan down on the counter and my hands were shaking. All the other pans were scattered across the kitchen floor like some kind of crazy obstacle course. I started picking them up one by one and putting them back in the cabinet, and my heart was beating so fast I could feel it in my throat. Through the office door, I could hear Nathan talking on his phone, and his voice had this high panicked edge to it that I'd never heard before. I walked closer to the door and pressed my ear against it. He was telling someone that I'd lost my mind, that I'd ruined his important work call on purpose, that he didn't know what to do with me anymore. I realized he was talking to his mother. He kept saying things like, "She's out of control and I can't live like this, and you need to come over here and talk to her." I stepped back from the door and went to sit on the couch in the living room. My phone was on the coffee table and I opened it up to my photos. I'd been taking pictures of everything Nathan destroyed over the past few months without really thinking about why. There was the cracked sauce jar from the grocery store, the soaked bedding in the bathtub, my makeup scattered all over the bathroom floor, the dent in the wall from where he threw his coffee mug, the broken TV remote, my shampoo bottle empty in the sink. I had dozens of photos documenting every single one of his tantrums. Less than an hour later, I heard a key turning in our front door. Nathan must have given his mother a key without asking me because Lorraine just walked right in like she owned the place. She didn't even knock. She came into the living room where I was still sitting on the couch and stood there with her hands on her hips looking at me like I was a misbehaving child. She started in on this lecture about how a wife needs to respect her husband's work time and create a peaceful home environment and be supportive instead of destructive. She said Nathan had important responsibilities and I needed to understand that my behavior was affecting his career. I just sat there listening to her go on, and then I held up my phone. I started showing her the photos one by one without saying anything. The cracked sauce jar, the soaked bedding, my makeup everywhere, the wall damage, the empty bottles. She went quiet as she looked at each photo and her face got this pinched expression like she'd bitten into something sour. When I got to the last photo, she handed my phone back to me and said we both needed to grow up. Not just Nathan. Both of us. Like I was equally responsible for this mess we were living in. Nathan's office door opened and he came out looking all disheveled with his hair sticking up. He and Lorraine went into the kitchen and started having this quiet conversation, but the duplex is small enough that I could hear most of it from the living room. Lorraine told him he needed to handle his wife, and those exact words made my stomach turn. Nathan complained that I'd changed, that I used to be sweet and easy to get along with, that now I was impossible to live with. He didn't mention any of his own behavior, or the fact that he'd been throwing tantrums for months before I started fighting back. Lorraine said something about marriage being hard work, and both people needing to compromise, but then she told Nathan that men sometimes need to be firm with their wives. I wanted to get up and throw something at both of them, but I just sat there on the couch gripping the armrest so hard my knuckles turned white. After Lorraine finally left, Nathan came and sat on the opposite end of the couch from me. We sat there in complete silence for what felt like forever. I looked at the clock on the wall and watched the minutes tick by. 1 hour passed, then another. Neither of us said a single word because what was there even to say at this point? We'd crossed into some kind of territory where normal couple communication didn't work anymore. We couldn't just talk about our feelings or work through our problems like regular people because we'd been destroying each other's stuff and yelling and throwing things for months. The silence was so heavy, it felt like something physical sitting between us on the couch. Nathan kept clearing his throat like he was going to say something, but then he'd just shift his position and stay quiet. I stared at the wall where he'd punched the hole and thought about how we were going to have to fix that before the landlord saw it. I thought about how much money we'd wasted on replacing things we'd broken. I thought about how tired I was of living like this. That night, Nathan took a pillow and blanket from the closet and went to sleep in his office. I went to our bedroom and lay down on the bed, but I couldn't fall asleep. I kept staring at the ceiling thinking about everything that had happened. I'd matched Nathan's energy like I thought I was supposed to, like I was standing up for myself and refusing to be pushed around. But lying there in the dark, I realized that matching his tantrums hadn't fixed anything at all. I'd just proved that I could be as destructive as him. We were both living in a war zone that we'd created together. The duplex that used to feel like home now felt like a battlefield. My tomatoes and peppers in the backyard were probably dying because I hadn't had the energy to take care of them in weeks. Everything we'd built together was falling apart, and I didn't know how to stop it. I'd thought that fighting back would make Nathan see how awful his behavior was, but instead it just gave him an excuse to say I was crazy too. I finally fell asleep around 3 a.m, feeling more exhausted than I'd ever felt in my life. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. I walked into the kitchen and found Nathan standing by the coffee maker with this big fake smile on his face. He asked me what I wanted for breakfast in this cheerful voice that sounded completely wrong after everything that had happened yesterday. I just stood there staring at him, trying to figure out if he was serious. I told him we needed to talk about what was happening to us, about the fighting and the destruction, and his mother walking into our house uninvited. Nathan's fake smile got even bigger, and he said there was nothing to talk about if I would just stop overreacting to everything. He said we could go back to normal if I would calm down and stop making problems where there weren't any. I felt something break inside me when he said that. Not in a dramatic way, just this quiet realization that Nathan genuinely believed none of this was his fault. He thought I was the problem. He thought if I would just go back to being quiet and accepting his tantrums, everything would be fine. I didn't say anything else to him. I just went back to the bedroom and got ready for work. I drove to the veterinary clinic downtown and walked in through the back entrance like I always did. My coworker Alyssa was in the break room making coffee, and she took one look at my face and asked if everything was okay at home. I opened my mouth to give her my usual response about how everything was fine, but instead I felt my eyes fill up with tears. Alyssa put down her coffee mug and took my arm and led me into the supply room. She closed the door behind us and I just started crying. Not pretty crying either, but the kind where you can't breathe right and your nose runs everywhere. I told her everything. About the pasta sauce at the grocery store, and Nathan throwing things and pouring out my shampoo and soaking our bedding in the bathtub. I told her about how I'd started fighting back and throwing bigger tantrums than his. I told her about the pans yesterday, and Nathan punching the wall and his mother showing up uninvited. Alyssa listened to the whole thing without interrupting once. When I finally stopped talking and wiped my face with a paper towel, Alyssa was quiet for a minute. Then she said very gently that what I was describing sounded like an abusive relationship. I started to argue with her because Nathan had never actually hit me, but she held up her hand. She said abuse wasn't just physical, and that destroying property and controlling behavior and creating a scary environment all counted. She said even though I was fighting back now, that didn't make it better. She said two people destroying each other wasn't a relationship. It was mutual destruction. She asked me if this was really how I wanted to live for the rest of my life. I stood there in the supply room surrounded by boxes of medical supplies and bags of dog food, and I realized I didn't have an answer to that question. I spent the rest of my shift at the clinic going through the motions of my job, while my brain kept replaying what Alyssa said about mutual destruction. I checked a beagle's ears for mites and thought about Nathan punching the wall. I gave a cat her vaccines and thought about me throwing pans during his work call. I cleaned exam rooms and thought about how we'd both become people I didn't recognize anymore. When I finally drove home that evening, I sat in the driveway for 10 minutes staring at our duplex. The lights were on in the kitchen and I could see Nathan moving around inside. Part of me wanted to just keep driving and never come back. But I got out of the car and walked to the front door because running away wouldn't fix anything either. I opened the door and stopped dead in the entryway. The kitchen table was set with our nice plates and cloth napkins we only used for company. Candles were burning in the middle of the table. Takeout containers from my favorite Thai restaurant were arranged on the counter, and the smell of pad Thai and green curry filled the whole house. Nathan came out of the kitchen wearing a smile that looked completely fake after everything that had happened. He asked if I was hungry and gestured at the table like he'd done something amazing. I just stood there holding my purse and staring at this scene he'd created. It was so obvious what he was doing. His mom probably taught him this exact move when he was growing up, watching his dad break plates and then buy flowers the next day. Make a big romantic gesture and pretend the bad stuff never happened. Smooth everything over with fancy food and candles instead of actually talking about the real problems. I walked past him to the bedroom and changed out of my scrubs while Nathan stayed in the kitchen. When I came back out, he was sitting at the table waiting for me with that same fake smile plastered on his face. I sat down across from him and he immediately started dishing pad Thai onto my plate. I watched him serve the food and arrange everything just right, and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no hope, no sadness. Just this empty feeling like I was watching a stranger perform a play I'd seen too many times before. I put my fork down before even taking a bite and told Nathan we needed couples therapy. I said our marriage was falling apart and we needed professional help to fix it. Nathan actually laughed. Not a mean laugh exactly, but this dismissive sound like I'd said something ridiculous. He said therapy was for people with real problems like addiction or affairs. He said we just needed to stop being so dramatic about everything and get back to normal. I asked him what normal meant to him, and he said it meant me not overreacting when he got frustrated and him not having to walk on eggshells in his own home. I pointed out that he'd punched a hole in our wall yesterday, and that wasn't frustration. That was violence. Nathan rolled his eyes and said I was making it sound worse than it was. He said lots of guys punch walls when they're mad and it didn't mean anything. I sat there looking at him across the candlelit table with expensive takeout getting cold between us, and I realized he genuinely believed what he was saying. He actually thought punching walls and destroying my stuff and soaking our bedding in the tub was normal behavior that I should just accept. The romantic dinner wasn't an apology. It was a bribe to get me to go back to being quiet and manageable. I stood up from the table and told Nathan I was serious about therapy. He said he wasn't going to waste money on some therapist who would just take my side anyway. I went to the bedroom and closed the door while Nathan stayed at the table eating Thai food by himself. The next morning, I woke up to Nathan's voice coming through the bedroom wall. He was in his office talking loud enough that I could hear every word. I got up and pressed my ear against the wall between our bedroom and his office. Nathan was on the phone with his boss, and his voice had this fake, cheerful tone that made my skin crawl. I heard him say something about construction next door causing noise issues yesterday. He apologized for the disruption to the video meeting and promised it wouldn't happen again. There was a long pause where Nathan wasn't talking, and I figured his boss was responding. Then Nathan's voice got higher and more stressed. He said the construction was unexpected and he'd already filed a complaint with the building management. Another pause. Nathan said he understood the client had been on the call, and he took full responsibility for not warning everyone about potential noise. His voice was getting tighter, and I could tell his boss wasn't buying the construction story. Nathan spent the next hour on damage control calls. I got dressed and ready for work while listening to him talk to different people trying to fix his professional reputation. He called someone named Winston back and spent 20 minutes explaining his home office situation and promising his work quality wouldn't suffer. He called another colleague and asked them to smooth things over with a client who'd been on the disrupted call. Every conversation made him sound more desperate, and I realized his job might actually be in trouble because of what I'd done with the pans. Part of me felt guilty, but a bigger part of me thought about all the times Nathan had made me late for work or disrupted my life with his tantrums, and he never cared about the consequences for me. I was making coffee in the kitchen when someone knocked on our front door. I opened it and found our landlord standing there looking annoyed. He said he'd gotten noise complaints from both neighbors about crashing sounds and yelling coming from our duplex. He asked if he could come in and look around. I let him in because I didn't know what else to do. The landlord walked through our living room and immediately saw the hole Nathan had punched in the hallway wall. He stopped and stared at it for a long time. Then he kept walking and noticed the cabinet door in the kitchen hanging crooked where the hinge had broken during one of our fights. He opened the cabinet and the door came completely off in his hand. The landlord set the broken cabinet door on the counter and turned to look at me. He asked very directly if he needed to be concerned about his property. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Nathan came out of his office right then, and the landlord's whole face changed. He asked Nathan what was going on with all the damage and noise complaints. Nathan immediately switched into this charming, friendly mode that made me want to throw up. He smiled at the landlord and said everything was fine. He said we'd had some minor accidents, but he was planning to repair everything himself this weekend. He put his hand on my shoulder like we were this happy couple, and I had to force myself not to pull away. The landlord looked at Nathan's hand on my shoulder and then looked at my face. He asked me directly if I felt safe in this house. I froze. Nathan's hand tightened on my shoulder. The landlord kept looking at me waiting for an answer, and I couldn't figure out what to say. If I said no, what would happen? Would the landlord call the police? Would Nathan get even angrier? If I said yes, was I lying? Did I actually feel safe here anymore? I finally said I was fine in this quiet voice that didn't sound convincing even to me. The landlord didn't look like he believed me, but he couldn't force me to say anything else. Nathan walked the landlord to the door, still being all friendly and charming. He promised again to fix everything and keep the noise down. The landlord handed Nathan a written warning about the noise complaints and property damage. He said any more problems, and he'd start eviction proceedings. Nathan took the paper and kept smiling until the landlord left. The second the door closed, Nathan's fake smile disappeared. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. He turned to me and started yelling about how I'd embarrassed him and made us look like trashy people who couldn't handle our problems. He said the landlord probably thought he was some kind of abuser now because of how I acted. I pointed out that he literally punched a wall yesterday, and the landlord could see the evidence. Nathan said that was different because I'd provoked him by dropping the pans during his meeting. He said if I hadn't started that whole thing, none of this would have happened. I told him he'd been throwing tantrums and breaking stuff for months before I ever fought back. Nathan said I was twisting everything around and making him sound like a bad guy when he was just reacting to my behavior. We stood in the hallway yelling at each other until I couldn't take it anymore and went to the guest room and slammed the door. That night, I got ready for bed in the guest room. I'd brought my pillow and some blankets in there earlier. I was just getting under the covers when I heard Nathan in the hallway. The guest room door opened and Nathan walked in. He didn't say anything, just went straight to the bed and started pulling the mattress off the frame. I asked him what he was doing and he said if I wanted to sleep separately, then I could sleep on the floor or the couch. He dragged the mattress out of the guest room and down the hall to his office. I heard him shoving furniture around to make room for it. I stood in the empty guest room looking at the bare bed frame and felt something break inside me that hadn't broken before. This wasn't anger or destruction during a fight. This was cold, calculated punishment because I'd tried to set a boundary. I grabbed my pillow and went to the living room couch. I lay there in the dark, listening to Nathan moving around in his office and thought about how we'd gotten to this point. I thought about the grocery store and the pasta sauce, and how that first tantrum should have been a warning sign. I thought about all the times I'd made excuses for him, or tried to fix things myself instead of leaving. I thought about how I'd started matching his tantrums, thinking it would make him see how awful his behavior was. But instead, it just gave him ammunition to say I was crazy too. The next day at work, my friend Ellie found me in the break room. She'd heard from Alyssa that things were bad at home. Ellie asked if I wanted to come stay at her place for a few days. She had a spare room and said I could have some space to think about what I wanted to do. I sat there with my coffee getting cold in my hands and seriously considered taking her up on it. It would be so easy to just pack a bag and leave for a while. But then I thought about Nathan staying in our duplex acting like he'd won something. I thought about how I'd be the one adjusting and accommodating again while he got to keep his space and his routine. I told Ellie thanks, but I wasn't leaving my own home. Nathan was the one with the problem, and I was tired of being the one who had to leave or change or fix things. Ellie looked worried, but she said she understood. She made me promise to call her anytime, day or night, if I needed help. I promised and went back to work, but I kept thinking about her offer all day. Part of me wondered if I was being stupid by staying. But another part of me was just so tired of running away from problems or trying to make myself smaller, so other people could be comfortable. When I got home that evening, Nathan's office door was closed and locked. I could hear him typing and talking on the phone. I made myself dinner and ate alone at the kitchen table. Nathan stayed in his office until after I went to bed on the couch. The next few days followed the same pattern. Nathan worked long hours with his door locked, and I went to work and came home and we barely saw each other. When we did pass in the hallway, we didn't speak. We were living like hostile roommates who happened to be married. I'd wake up on the couch and hear Nathan already in his office. I'd come home and he'd be in there with the door locked. We stopped cooking meals together. We stopped talking about our days. We stopped existing in the same space except for these brief, awkward moments in the hallway where we'd both look away and keep walking. I realized Nathan was avoiding me as much as I was avoiding him. Neither of us knew how to fix what we'd broken, and neither of us wanted to be the first one to try. So we just lived in this Cold War silence that felt worse than the yelling and destruction had been. I worked a late emergency surgery on a cat who'd eaten something toxic. By the time I finished, it was almost midnight. I drove home exhausted and just wanting to collapse on the couch. I unlocked the front door and walked into the dark house. I flipped on the kitchen light and noticed something different right away. There was a new lock on Nathan's office door. Not just the regular door lock, but one of those deadbolts you need a key for. I walked over and tried the handle, and it didn't budge. Then I went to make myself something to eat and found another new lock on the pantry door. I stood there staring at the lock on the pantry where we kept all our food. Nathan came out of his office and I asked him what he was doing. He said since I couldn't be trusted not to disturb his work, he was protecting his space and his food. I asked him if he was seriously locking up our food, and he said it was his food since he'd bought most of it. He said I could buy my own groceries and keep them somewhere else. Then he went back in his office and locked the new deadbolt behind him. I stood in the kitchen staring at the locked pantry door for a long time after Nathan went back to his office. My stomach growled because I'd worked through lunch at the clinic and now I couldn't even get to my own food. I walked to the garage and grabbed my toolbox from the shelf. Then I went straight to Nathan's office door and unscrewed the router from the wall jack. I unplugged the modem too and wrapped all the cords around both devices. Nathan's door stayed locked while I carried everything out to my car. I popped the trunk and put the router and modem inside, then locked it and took my keys with me back into the house. About 20 minutes later, Nathan came storming out of his office yelling about the internet being down. I was sitting on the couch scrolling through my phone and I told him the internet was fine, just in a safe place. He demanded to know where it was, and I said he could have it back when he unlocked the pantry. Nathan's face went red and he started pacing back and forth in the living room. He pulled out his phone and I watched him turn on his hotspot and connect his laptop to it. He gave me this smug look like he'd won something and went back to his office. I ordered pizza on my phone since I still couldn't get to any real food. The next morning, Nathan was already in his office when I left for work. I could hear him on a video call talking to someone about quarterly projections. That evening when I got home, he was still in there, but I noticed he kept coming out to check his phone. He'd look at the screen, mutter something, then go back to his office. This happened 3 more times before dinner. Finally, around 8 o'clock, he knocked on the living room wall to get my attention. I looked up from my phone and he asked where the router was. I reminded him about the pantry lock and he said that was different because the food was his. I said the internet was mine then since I paid half the bill. He went back to his office and slammed the door. The next day I came home to find a package on the porch. Nathan must have been watching for it because he grabbed it before I even got my keys out. He took it straight to his office and I heard him ripping open the box. An hour later I tried to connect to our Wi-Fi network and it was gone. Instead there was a new network called Nathan's network and it was password protected. I tried a few obvious passwords but none of them worked. At work the next day I was sitting in the break room watching videos on my phone during lunch. Alyssa came in to make coffee and noticed I was using my data instead of the clinic Wi-Fi. She asked why and I told her about the separate internet networks at home. Alyssa stopped pouring her coffee and just stared at me. She set the pot down very carefully and sat across from me at the table. She said very quietly that what I was describing wasn't normal. She said I was a smart and capable person who didn't have to live like this. I told her I knew it wasn't normal, but I wasn't going to let Nathan push me around anymore. Alyssa reached across the table and put her hand on mine. She said matching his crazy didn't make me strong. It just made me participate in something that was destroying me. I pulled my hand back and said I had to get back to work. I avoided Alyssa for the rest of the day because I didn't want to hear what she was saying even though I knew she was right. Nathan started missing deadlines at work. I could hear him on stressed phone calls with his boss through his office door. One afternoon, he was in there for over an hour and I heard him saying he'd have everything done by end of day. That evening, his office door flew open and Nathan came out looking furious. He said Winston had called him in for a serious talk about his performance. He said his boss was threatening to put him on a performance improvement plan. Nathan stood in the hallway and yelled that this was all my fault for being difficult and making his home life so stressful he couldn't focus on work. I was sitting on the couch and I said nobody forced him to spend all his energy on revenge tactics instead of his actual job. Nathan grabbed his briefcase from beside the door and threw it across the room. It hit the wall right next to the hole he'd punched before and made a new dent in the drywall. The briefcase fell to the floor and papers scattered everywhere. There was a knock on the door 10 minutes later. Nathan and I both froze and looked at each other. I got up and opened it to find our landlord standing there with a clipboard. He did not look happy. He said the neighbors on both sides had reported another loud crash and he was done with warnings. He handed me a formal written notice on official letterhead. The notice said any more property damage or disturbances would result in eviction proceedings. He asked both of us to sign it to acknowledge we'd received it. Nathan came to the door and we both signed our names on the form. The landlord took it back and said he'd owned this duplex for 15 years without any problems until we moved in. He looked at both of us and said whatever we were doing to each other needed to stop or we needed to leave. Then he walked back to his car and drove away. Nathan went back to his office without saying anything. I sat on the couch and looked at the 2 holes in the wall and the scattered papers on the floor. I thought about the locked pantry and the separate internet networks and the way we couldn't even be in the same room anymore. I grabbed my keys and went out to my car. I sat in the driveway with the engine off just staring at the duplex. An hour went by and I still couldn't make myself go back inside. The house had become this place where everything felt like a battle and I was tired all the time. I wasn't afraid Nathan would hit me because he never had. But the whole environment had turned toxic and every day felt like walking through a war zone. I pulled out my phone and just sat there holding it, not sure who to call or what to say. I ended up calling Ellie around 9 that night, still sitting in my car with the engine off. She picked up on the second ring and I could hear her TV playing in the background. I told her everything about the landlord's notice and the separate internet networks, and how Nathan and I were basically living like enemies in the same house. Ellie listened without interrupting, and when I finished she said I could come stay at her place whenever I needed to, that her couch was always available. Then she got quiet for a second before saying, maybe it was time to talk to a lawyer just to understand my options. I thanked her and hung up, then sat there staring at my phone for another 20 minutes before going inside. The next morning, I looked up divorce attorneys during my lunch break at the clinic. I told myself I was just gathering information, not actually planning to leave. I found someone named Patricia Chen who had good reviews and availability that week. I made the appointment for Thursday afternoon and didn't tell Nathan about it. When Thursday came, I left work early and drove to her office in a building downtown. The waiting room had uncomfortable chairs and magazines from 6 months ago. Patricia called me back after 10 minutes and we sat in her office with a big window overlooking the parking lot. She asked about my marriage and I gave her the basic facts about Nathan's tantrums and my retaliation. She took notes on a yellow legal pad and asked if Nathan had ever physically hurt me. I said no, he'd never hit me or anything like that. Then she asked about emotional abuse and I froze because I didn't know how to answer that question. Patricia put down her pen and explained that destroying property and controlling behavior and creating a hostile environment all counted as forms of abuse even without physical violence. She said what I was describing fit a pattern she'd seen many times before. She pulled out some pamphlets about domestic abuse and support resources, then told me to think carefully about whether I wanted to try to save this marriage or protect myself by leaving. I took the pamphlets and stuffed them in my purse, then drove home in a daze thinking about the word abuse and whether it really applied to my situation. I walked into the duplex to find a strange man working in our kitchen. He was on a ladder patching the hole Nathan had punched in the wall, and there were tools spread out on the counter. Nathan came out of his office when he heard me come in and explained that he'd hired a handyman to fix all the damage before the landlord came back. The handyman glanced between us and kept working, but I could tell he felt uncomfortable. He probably sensed the tension radiating off both of us. I went to the bedroom without saying anything to Nathan and closed the door. Later that evening, after the handyman left, Nathan found me in the kitchen making dinner. He told me in this cold, formal voice that he was fixing everything so we wouldn't get evicted, speaking to me like I was a business partner instead of his wife. I realized we hadn't had a real conversation in over a week, just these tactical exchanges about practical matters. He asked what time I'd be home tomorrow, and I told him my usual time. Then he nodded and went back to his office. I ate dinner alone at the table, looking at the freshly patched wall. At work the next day, Alyssa cornered me in the supply room and asked how things were going at home. I tried to brush her off, but she wouldn't let it go. She said I looked exhausted and stressed and she was worried about me. I finally admitted that Nathan and I were barely speaking and living like hostile roommates. Alyssa said even if Nathan wouldn't go to couples counseling, I needed to talk to someone because this situation was clearly taking a toll. She pulled up a therapist's website on her phone and showed me the profile for someone named Heidi Molina, who worked with relationship issues and trauma. I took a picture of the screen and promised Alyssa I'd think about it. I called Heidi's office that afternoon and made an appointment for the following Tuesday. The receptionist asked what I wanted to work on, and I said relationship problems, which felt like a massive understatement. When Tuesday came, I left work at 4 and drove to Heidi's office across town. She met me in the waiting room, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and kind eyes. Her office had soft lighting and comfortable chairs and a box of tissues on the side table. She asked me to tell her what brought me in, and I started talking about Nathan's tantrums and my retaliation, and everything that had happened over the past months. Saying it all out loud to a stranger made me realize how completely abnormal our situation had become. Heidi asked what I wanted to get out of therapy, and I opened my mouth to say I wanted to fix my marriage, but the words wouldn't come out. I sat there staring at the tissue box and realized I didn't even know if I wanted to save my marriage anymore. Heidi didn't push me for an answer. Instead, she started asking about Nathan's behavior patterns and my responses to them. She explained that what I was describing followed a classic abuse cycle, even though Nathan wasn't hitting me. She said my retaliation was a trauma response to feeling powerless in my own home. Then she said something that hit me hard, that matching his destructiveness didn't give me power back. It just made me participate in my own harm. I left that session feeling like someone had taken everything I thought I knew about my situation and turned it upside down. I kept seeing Heidi twice a week after that first appointment. Over the next few sessions, things started getting clearer in my head. I'd been so focused on proving I wouldn't be pushed around that I'd lost sight of whether this relationship was even worth fighting for. Nathan hadn't changed at all since I started matching his tantrums. He'd just gotten sneakier about his control tactics, like locking the pantry and creating separate internet networks. I was exhausted from constantly being on guard in my own home. Heidi helped me see that I deserved better than living in a war zone, whether I stayed with Nathan or not. 3 weeks into therapy, Nathan's mother called me directly for the first time in weeks. I was sitting in my car outside the clinic after work when her name popped up on my screen. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me.
My parents refused to help when I was sick. Now they expect me to bankroll and raise my golden brother's abandoned kids. Sup, Reddit. 6 years ago, my parents told me to figure out my own medical crisis while they went on vacation. Last week, they showed up demanding I fund raising my brother's kids after he abandoned them via email. I gave them their own words back, and what followed was a complete shit show that exposed exactly who these people really are. I'm 31 male and haven't spoken to my parents in almost 6 years. Not a single word. No birthday calls, no holiday texts, no awkward run-ins at family gatherings, because I stopped going to those too. Complete radio silence. The breaking point? Type 2 diabetes diagnosis when I was 25, between jobs, and my insurance wouldn't cover the medication I literally needed to stay alive. But before we dive into that particular disaster, let me paint you a picture of my family dynamics, because this whole situation makes way more sense when you understand the pattern. My parents, Richard and Patricia, are your stereotypical suburban middle-class couple who spent 30 years building what they considered a comfortable retirement. Dad worked in manufacturing management, climbed the ladder over decades, ended up making decent money. Mom did accounting for a regional hospital network. Steady work with good benefits. They retired at 62 with a paid-off house in a nice neighborhood, 2 cars that were only a few years old, and enough retirement savings to take annual cruises without even blinking at the cost. They weren't struggling financially. Not even close. They had that comfortable middle-class retirement where you can afford pretty much anything you want within reason. The kind of retirement most people dream about. No mortgage, no debt, pension coming in, 401k sitting there as backup. They were set. My older brother Wyatt is 39, 8 years older than me. That age gap meant we were never really close growing up. By the time I was starting middle school and actually developing a personality, he was already moved out and doing his own thing. We existed in the same family but lived basically separate lives. Growing up, I always felt like the practice kid. You know how some families have that dynamic where the first kid gets all the attention and the second one just kind of exists? That was us. Wyatt was the golden child who could do no wrong. Every milestone he hit was celebrated like he'd cured something major. Meanwhile, I could bring home straight A's and get a pat on the head and a, "That's nice, dear." The favoritism was blatant, but nobody acknowledged it. When Wyatt needed money for anything, car repairs, rent assistance, whatever, my parents were there immediately with open checkbooks. When I needed help, Suddenly, it became a teaching moment about self-reliance and personal responsibility. I remember being 16 and needing $200 for a school trip. It was this educational thing all my friends were going. I'd been looking forward to it for months. My parents said no. Too expensive. They didn't see the value in it. I needed to learn that not everything in life gets handed to you. 2 weeks later, Wyatt asked for $800 to help with his security deposit on a new apartment. They gave it to him same day. When I pointed out the inconsistency, Dad said it was different because Wyatt was an adult with adult responsibilities. I was just a kid asking for vacation money. That kind of thing happened constantly. Different standards, different rules, different everything depending on which son you were talking about. I learned pretty early that I couldn't rely on them for support. Everything I got, I had to earn or fight for myself. Fast forward to when I was 25. I'd been working at this tech startup for about a year and a half. Not a huge company, maybe 30 employees, but it was growing and I was learning a lot. The pay was decent, benefits were okay, and I was building experience in my field. Then the funding dried up. Investors pulled out. Company couldn't make payroll, and we all got laid off with about 2 weeks' notice. Not ideal, but these things happen. The job market was decent at the time, so I wasn't panicking. Started applying places immediately, had my resume updated, began networking. The plan was to find something within a month or two, bridge the gap with savings, and move forward. Then I started feeling off, constantly thirsty, tired all the time, losing weight without trying, having to use the bathroom every hour. Classic diabetes symptoms, but I didn't recognize them at first. Thought maybe it was stress from the job loss. After 2 weeks of feeling progressively worse, I went to an urgent care clinic. They ran some tests, my blood sugar levels were through the roof, and the doctor looked at me with that expression medical professionals get when they're about to deliver bad news. You have type 2 diabetes, he said. Your A1C is 11.2. That's dangerously high. We need to get you on medication immediately. He wrote prescriptions for 2 different medications plus testing supplies. Told me I needed to check my blood sugar multiple times daily, follow a strict diet, and come back in 3 months for follow-up. Then he handed me the prescriptions and wished me luck. I took the scripts to the pharmacy, figuring they'd be expensive but manageable. The pharmacist ran them through my insurance, the COBRA coverage from my old job that I'd signed up for, and came back with a total that made my stomach drop. That'll be $847 for the month's supply of everything, she said cheerfully. $847 for 1 month. My unemployment benefits were $380 weekly. Even with budgeting, I was looking at maybe $1,600 monthly income. Rent alone was $850. This medication would take more than half of what I had left after housing. I asked about generic versions, discount programs, anything to bring the cost down. She tried a few things, got it down to $780. Still completely unsustainable. I told her I'd have to figure something out and left without the medications. That night, I spent hours researching options. Patient assistance programs that would take months to process. Discount cards that only worked at specific pharmacies. Canadian pharmacies that might be legit but also might not be. Nothing was going to solve my immediate problem of needing medication now and not being able to afford it. I had about $3,000 in savings. That was supposed to be my emergency fund for exactly this kind of situation. But if I spent it all on medication, I'd have nothing for rent, food, or the unexpected expenses that always pop up. I was looking at choosing between my health and having a place to live, so I did what any reasonable person would do when facing a genuine medical emergency with no good options. I called my parents, not asking for a handout, not expecting them to cover everything forever, just looking for temporary help while I got back on my feet. I explained the whole situation, the layoff, the diagnosis, the medication costs, how I had job interviews lined up but needed a bridge for maybe 3 to 4 months until I got hired somewhere with better insurance. I laid out actual numbers. If they could cover maybe $600 monthly for 3 months, that would give me enough breathing room to make everything else work. Dad's response came after about 5 seconds of silence. You're 25 years old, he said, voice flat. You need to figure some things out on your own. Don't rely on us just because we're your family. Mom was on speakerphone, and she jumped in with her addition. We've already raised you. You're an adult now. This is your responsibility to handle. I sat there stunned, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process what I was hearing. This was a medical emergency. I wasn't asking them to fund a vacation or buy me a car. I needed medication to not go into diabetic shock. And they were lecturing me about personal responsibility. So you're saying you won't help at all? I asked, just to be crystal clear. We're saying you need to learn to manage your own problems. Dad replied. We can't bail you out every time life gets difficult. Every time? I'd never asked them for major help before in my adult life. This was literally the first time I'd requested anything significant since moving out. I have diabetes, I said slowly, trying to make them understand. Without medication, I could end up in the hospital or worse. This isn't me being irresponsible or lazy. This is a genuine medical crisis. Then you'll figure out what you need to do, Dad said. We didn't raise you to come running to us whenever things get tough. Mom added her final gem. Maybe this is what you need to learn independence. We've spent too many years enabling you. Enabling me? By not helping me with anything? The logic was non-existent, but I was past the point of arguing. Got it, I said. Thanks for nothing. I hung up. That was September 2017. Last time we spoke until 6 weeks ago. Here's what happened in those 6 years. I figured it out on my own, just like they told me to. Sold my car and bought something cheaper, freeing up $200 monthly. Moved to a smaller apartment with a roommate I found through work, cutting rent in half. Applied to every patient assistance program that existed, filled out mountains of paperwork, waited through their processing times. Started buying medication from Canadian pharmacies at a quarter of the US price. Found websites that connected Americans with legitimate Canadian pharmacies that would ship across the border. Was it legal? Gray area. Did I care? Not even slightly. I was choosing between following pharmaceutical industry pricing schemes or staying alive. Pretty easy decision when you frame it that way. The first few months were rough. Managing diabetes while dealing with the stress of unemployment and family rejection was like juggling chainsaws while walking a tightrope. Blood sugar all over the place from the stress. Constantly worried about money, wondering if I'd made the right choices. But I handled it, found creative solutions, cut every possible expense, made it work through sheer determination. I landed a new job after 3 months of searching. The insurance was better, brought my medication costs down to manageable levels. I threw myself into work, proved myself valuable, and got promoted within a year. Then again, 2 years after that. Built a reputation as someone reliable who delivered results. Met my now wife Natalie at a friend's barbecue when I was 27. She was smart, funny, had her life together, and didn't come with any family drama attached. We clicked immediately. Started dating, moved in together after a year, got engaged 6 months after that. Bought a house when I was 28. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. 3 bedrooms, decent neighborhood, good schools nearby for the kids we were planning to have eventually. Got married at 29 in a small ceremony with Natalie's family and our close friends. My parents weren't invited. They didn't even know it happened until someone probably told them months later. Built an actual life. The kind of stable, successful life my parents always said they wanted for me. Just did it completely without their input or support. My parents? Didn't hear from them once. No calls, no texts, no attempts at reconciliation. They clearly meant what they said about me handling my own problems. Fine by me. Then 6 weeks ago, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. Opened it to find a message from my mom. We need to talk. It's urgent. I stared at that text for a solid minute, sitting there on my couch with Natalie beside me watching a movie. 6 years of complete silence and now something suddenly urgent? My first instinct was to delete it and move on with my life. I didn't respond. She texted again 2 hours later. This is about your nephews. Please call. That got my attention. Wyatt had 2 kids. I knew that much from the occasional Facebook stalking I'd done over the years. Boys, ages 8 and 6 now. I'd never met them. Didn't even know their names until I looked at the Facebook photos Mom had posted over the years that I'd never bothered to engage with. They looked like normal kids. Smiling in photos, playing at parks, the usual family stuff. I called. Curiosity overcoming better judgment. Part of me wondered if something had happened to Wyatt. Part of me wondered if the kids were in danger. The responsible part of my brain kicked in despite my better judgment. Finally, Mom said when she answered. Not even a hello first. We've been trying to reach you for days. You sent 1 text, 2 hours ago. 2. Well, this is serious. We need to talk about Wyatt's children. Can you come over? We should discuss this in person. I'm not driving to your house. Whatever you need to say it now. She sighed, like I was the one being difficult here. Fine. It's about the boys, your nephews. They've been living with us for the past 2 months. Okay? And we need help. We're not young anymore. Raising 2 children at our age is exhausting. Where's Wyatt? Another sigh. That's complicated. Uncomplicate it. She launched into the whole story then. Wyatt's wife Jennifer had died in a car accident 8 months ago. Some guy ran a red light, T-boned her car, she died at the scene. Tragic, horrible. The kind of thing nobody should have to go through. Wyatt had apparently been struggling to cope ever since. Started drinking heavily, according to Mom, though she said it in that tone that suggested she was downplaying the severity. Knowing Wyatt's history with substances, he'd had problems in his 20s that my parents had always excused. I suspected drinking heavily meant something pretty severe. Then 2 months ago, Wyatt sent my parents an email. Not a phone call. Not an in-person conversation. An email. Said he needed time to figure things out, that he couldn't handle being a parent right now, that the boys were better off with their grandparents while he got his head together, and then he just disappeared. Stopped responding to calls and texts. My parents had no idea where he was. Could be staying with friends, could be in a motel somewhere, could be halfway across the country for all they knew. He'd essentially abandoned his kids via electronic communication and vanished. Classy move, Wyatt. Really stepping up to the plate there. So what's the plan? I asked Mom. Is he coming back? Is this temporary or permanent? We don't know, she admitted. He's not responding to us. His phone goes straight to voicemail. We've had the boys for 2 months now and we're drowning. That sounds difficult. What do you want from me? We need you to help financially, she said, getting to the point. These boys need things. Food, clothes, school supplies, activities. We're looking at about $1,500 monthly for their expenses. Plus, we're having to look into therapy for them because they're obviously traumatized. I actually laughed. Couldn't help it. The situation was so absurd that laughter was the only appropriate response. You want me to send you $1,500 a month? These are your nephews. Your family. Family takes care of family. I actually laughed. Couldn't help it. You want me to send you $1,500 a month? These are your nephews. Family takes care of family. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. That's interesting, I said. Because 6 years ago, when I needed help with $800 monthly for medication, you told me to figure it out on my own. Said you wouldn't bail me out every time life gets difficult. Silence on the other end. That was different, Mom finally said. How? Explain to me how it was different. You were an adult who needed to learn responsibility. These are children. So when I was between jobs with a medical emergency, that was a teaching moment. But when Wyatt abandons his kids, that's when family steps up. This isn't about keeping score. Dad's voice came through. Apparently I was on speaker. These boys need help. Then help them. You're retired with money in the bank. You told me you couldn't help with $600 monthly when I was literally sick. Now you're asking for $1,500 for kids that aren't even my responsibility? We're on a fixed income, Mom said. We can't afford to raise 2 children. So figure it out on your own. Don't rely on me just because we're family. I used their exact words back at them. The silence that followed was beautiful. That's different, and you know it, Dad said, voice tight. How? Please explain how this is different from what you told me 6 years ago. Because we actually helped you when you were growing up, Mom snapped. We raised you, fed you, put a roof over your head for 18 years. You owe us. I owe you? For doing the literal bare minimum that parents are legally required to do? You chose to have kids. That's not some debt I need to repay. We're not asking you to raise them, Dad said. Just help financially while we figure out a long-term solution. And what happens when there's no long-term solution? What happens when Wyatt doesn't come back and these kids need to be raised for the next 10 years? You think I'm going to keep sending checks? Your brother is going through something difficult, Mom said. He'll get himself together. Maybe this is what he needs to learn independence, I said, throwing her words from 6 years ago right back at her. Maybe you've spent too many years enabling him. Don't be cruel, she said. I'm not being cruel. I'm being exactly as supportive as you taught me to be. Remember? You can't bail people out every time life gets difficult. This is completely different, Dad said. These are innocent children. Then be their grandparents. Use your comfortable retirement savings that you couldn't spare $600 from 6 years ago. You'll figure it out. We need your help, Mom said, and I could hear the desperation creeping into her voice. No, you need my money. There's a difference. You don't actually want me involved in these kids' lives. You just want me to fund their existence while you two maintain your lifestyle. That's not fair, she protested. You're right. It's not fair. Just like it wasn't fair when you told your diabetic son to figure it out alone while you went on a cruise. But here we are. We didn't go on a cruise right after that, Dad said. 3 months later. Close enough. The point is, you had money for vacations, but not for medication. Now you have money for your retirement, but not for your grandkids. Funny pattern. If you won't help, just say so, Mom said coldly. I won't help. There. I said it. Then you're exactly as selfish as we thought. Good. I learned from the best. I hung up before they could respond. Natalie had been listening to the whole conversation. She walked over and hugged me, and I realized my hands were shaking. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah, just didn't expect that to feel so satisfying," she laughed. "You gave them back everything they gave you." 6 years, I said. 6 years of nothing. And they show up asking for money like we're suddenly family again. The next week, they tried a different approach. Mom called and left a voicemail that was clearly rehearsed. Her voice was breaking in all the right places, emotional but calculated, hitting every manipulation beat perfectly. "Sweetie, it's Mom. I've been thinking a lot about our conversation, about what happened 6 years ago. And you're right. We should have helped you. We should have been there when you were sick. I don't know what we were thinking. Maybe we were scared. Maybe we didn't understand how serious it was. But we failed you, and I'm sorry for that." Pause for dramatic effect. Sniffle. "I know I can't take back what happened. I know we hurt you, but this is a chance for us to move forward as a family, to do the right thing together. These boys need us. They need all of us. Please call me back so we can talk about this properly. I love you." I played that voicemail for Natalie. She looked at me with raised eyebrows. "That's possibly the most manipulative thing I've ever heard," she said. "She's not even apologizing for what they did. She's apologizing for your feelings about it." "Sorry we failed you," I said. "Not sorry for telling me to handle my medical emergency alone. Not sorry for going on a cruise 3 months later. Just sorry that I felt bad about it." And immediately followed by asking for money again? Classic non-apology. "I'm sorry, but here's why you should do what I want anyway." I didn't call back. The message had been carefully crafted to hit emotional buttons while avoiding actual accountability. If she genuinely wanted to apologize, she would have done it without immediately pivoting back to their demands. 3 days later, they showed up at my house. Just appeared on my doorstep Saturday morning like they had any right to be there. Natalie answered the door while I was in the shower, came upstairs looking equal parts annoyed and amused. "Your parents are here," she said. "Should I tell them to leave or do you want to handle this?" "I'll handle it," I said, getting dressed. "This should be interesting." I went downstairs to find them sitting in my living room like they owned the place. Dad was looking around at the furniture, the TV, the framed pictures on the walls, assessing everything, calculating what my life was worth. Mom was perched on the edge of the couch, clutching her purse like she was afraid something might jump out at her. "Nice place," Dad said when he saw me. "Doing well for yourself. Must be nice having all this while your nephews struggle." "Right. Starting with guilt trips immediately. Classic move." "What do you want?" I asked, not bothering to sit down. "We want to talk," Mom said. "Have an actual conversation instead of fighting over the phone. We drove an hour to get here. The least you can do is hear us out. There's nothing to talk about. I'm not giving you money. You could have saved the trip. We're not just asking for money," Dad said, leaning forward. "We're asking you to step up for family. These boys are your nephews, whether you acknowledge them or not. They've lost their mother. Their father abandoned them. They need stability and support. And I'm your son, whether you acknowledge it or not. Didn't seem to matter 6 years ago when I needed stability and support." Mom's expression hardened. "You're really going to hold that over us forever? We made one mistake and you're going to punish us for the rest of our lives? One mistake? You told your diabetic son to figure out his medical crisis alone. That wasn't a mistake. That was a choice. You chose your comfort over my health." "We made a mistake," she repeated, like saying it again would change reality. "We admit that. But you can't seriously compare helping with medication to raising two traumatized children. The situations aren't even remotely similar." "You're right. One situation involved $600 monthly for 3 months, $1,800 total. The other involves $1,500 monthly for years, potentially. Tens of thousands of dollars. Maybe more. The expensive one you want help with. The cheap one you couldn't be bothered." "Money isn't the point," Dad said, voice rising slightly. "Money is exactly the point. You have enough to raise these kids. You just don't want to spend your retirement savings on them. You want me to fund it so you can keep your lifestyle intact. The cruises, the comfortable retirement, all of it." "That's not true," Mom protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "Then use your own money. You're not broke. You're comfortable. You have savings, pensions, paid off assets. Prove me wrong." They couldn't. We all knew they had the resources. They just didn't want to use them. The silence stretched out, heavy and uncomfortable. "What about the boys?" Mom finally asked. "Don't you care what happens to them? They're innocent in all of this. They didn't ask for any of this to happen. I care that they're in a bad situation. I don't think that situation is my responsibility to fix financially. Wyatt abandoned them. That's on him. You're their grandparents who spent years enabling his behavior. That's on you. I'm their uncle they've never met because you cut me out of your lives. That's not on me. Family is family, Dad said, pulling out what he probably thought was his trump card. You're right. And when your family member had a medical emergency, you told him to handle it alone. Told him he needed to learn responsibility. Told him you wouldn't bail him out just because life got difficult. When your other family member spent his entire adult life making bad decisions, you enabled every single one. Gave him money whenever he asked. Made excuses for his failures. And now you're shocked that he turned out to be someone who abandons his kids via email. We did the best we could with both of you, Mom said. No, you did the best for Wyatt and told me to figure it out. Different standards, different rules. Same pattern my whole life. We went back and forth like this for another 20 minutes. Every angle they tried, I shut down. Every guilt trip, I redirected with their own logic from 6 years ago. Every attempt to paint me as the bad guy got flipped back onto them. Dad tried the practical approach. These boys will remember who was there for them and who wasn't. You're building resentment that will last forever. Like the resentment I built when you told me to figure out my medical crisis alone? That kind of lasting resentment? Mom tried the emotional manipulation. We're getting older. We won't be around forever. You'll regret this when we're gone. You know what I'll actually regret? Not standing up for myself 6 years ago. Not calling you out on your selective support. Not recognizing sooner that you only consider me family when you need something. Dad stood up, clearly frustrated. This conversation is going nowhere. You've made your decision. You're choosing to abandon these children. I'm choosing not to enable Wyatt's irresponsibility with my money. Same way you chose not to enable my medical needs with yours. Full circle. Eventually, they realized they weren't getting anywhere and left. Mom stood up, gathered her purse, looked around my house one more time, like she was cataloging everything she could use against me later. As they walked to the door, she turned around one final time. You've changed, she said, voice cold. You used to be such a sweet boy. So kind and caring. I don't even recognize you anymore. Yeah, well, life changes people. Especially when your parents tell you to figure out life-threatening medical issues on your own. Turns out that kind of abandonment really builds character. We didn't abandon you. You told your diabetic son with no insurance that you wouldn't help with medication costs because he needed to learn responsibility. What would you call that? She didn't have an answer. They left, and I watched them drive away from my window. Natalie came and stood beside me. That was intense, she said. That was necessary. They needed to understand that I'm not going to fold just because they show up and demand things. Do you think they'll keep trying? Probably. People like them don't accept no easily. They're used to getting what they want through guilt and manipulation. I was right. That was 2 weeks ago. Since then, I've gotten texts from extended family members I barely know. Aunts and uncles who haven't spoken to me in years suddenly have very strong opinions about my obligations. Cousins I met maybe twice at childhood birthday parties are lecturing me about family values. The messages follow predictable patterns. Those poor boys need help. How can you be so heartless? Your parents raised you, and this is how you repay them. Family takes care of family. Nobody asks why my parents with a comfortable retirement and paid-off house need financial help from their son. Nobody questions why Wyatt abandoned his children or where he disappeared to. Nobody wonders why I went 6 years without contact with my family or what might have caused that. Just blanket assumption that I'm the bad guy. One aunt sent me a multi-paragraph text about how blood is thicker than water and how I should be the bigger person. I didn't respond. Another uncle called me directly, left a voicemail about how disappointed my grandparents would be if they were still alive to see me turn my back on family. That one almost made me laugh. My grandparents always liked Wyatt better too. Pattern recognition isn't that hard. The most aggressive messages came from my mom's sister. 5 texts in one day, each one more guilt-trippy than the last. Started with gentle persuasion. I got falsely accused, suspended from my job, and my wife served me divorce papers, saying I can't be with a predator. Later, I discovered she set me up, so I made sure it cost her everything. Subreddit. Imagine if the person who was supposed to have your back during the worst accusation of your life was actually the one who destroyed you. Here's how I found out my wife didn't just abandon me. She orchestrated everything. I, 34 male, work as an academic advisor at a mid-tier state university. I'd been there 6 years. Decent pay, good benefits, boring as hell, but stable. My wife, Marin, 33 female, worked in corporate HR at a tech consulting firm downtown. We'd been married 5 years, together for 8. Looking back, I can pinpoint when things shifted. December, 3 months before everything exploded. She started coming home later. End of quarter crunch, she'd say. Phone habits changed. face down everywhere. Password changed to something she never told me. When I asked about it casually, she said her company required stronger security protocols. Then, March 15th happened. My supervisor knocked. She looked like someone just kicked her dog. Hey, can you come to HR? They need to talk to you. The tone was wrong. Too careful. Too quiet. Got escorted to a conference room. 3 people I'd never met. HR director, title non-coordinator, and someone from the university's Office of Institutional Equity. They introduced themselves. Then they hit me with it. We received an anonymous report through our student conduct hotline. The report suggests a violation of university policy regarding appropriate staff-student interactions. Per institutional protocol, we're placing you on administrative leave pending review. I sat there like they'd just told me I had 6 months to live. What? What violation? What are you talking about? The coordinator jumped in. We can't provide specifics at this stage. You'll receive a notice of investigation within 7 to 10 business days that includes a redacted version of the complaint. For now, we need you to surrender your access card and keys and refrain from coming to campus. This is insane, I said. My voice sounded far away. I haven't done anything. The HR director slid a piece of paper across the table. A notice of leave, my name, the date, a paragraph of legal boilerplate, a line for my signature acknowledging receipt. You're entitled to consult with an attorney or union representative, but we do need you to leave campus today. I signed it because what else was I going to do? I went back to my office and exported my entire inbox and calendar to a flash drive. 6 years of records. I'd cut my access 10 minutes later. My supervisor was waiting in the hallway when I came out. She looked like she'd been crying. I don't know what they told you, she said, but I know you. You wouldn't do this. I didn't trust myself to respond, just nodded and kept walking. Handed my keys and ID card to the coordinator at the security desk. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in my car in the parking lot with a box of my life on the passenger seat. No job, no answers, and the growing realization that someone had just destroyed me. I called Marin. She didn't pick up. Texted her. Need to talk. Something happened at work. Call me when you can. She replied 2 hours later. In a meeting. What's wrong? I got suspended. False accusation. Need to talk. 3 dots. Then, OMG, are you okay? I'll be home by 7. She got home at 8:30, walked in with takeout from the Thai place we used to go to, sat down across from me at the kitchen table and asked what happened. I told her everything. The meeting, the accusation, the suspension. I told her it was a lie, that I'd never touched a student, never even thought about it, that I didn't understand who would do this or why. She listened, nodded in the right places, said all the right things. This is insane. They can't just believe some random person. We'll fight this. Then she got quiet for a second. I just need to ask, and I'm not accusing you, but is there anything that could be misinterpreted? Any emails that might look different to someone who doesn't know you? No, nothing like that. Okay. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm just trying to understand what we're dealing with. We need to be prepared for everything. I know. This is going to get messy. My office is already asking questions. I need to know you're telling me everything. I am. She nodded. Okay, then we'll figure this out. But something in her voice felt off, like she was already calculating. Within a week, everyone knew. My phone blew up with carefully worded, hope you're okay messages. A few friends went ghost. People stopped replying once my name got attached to student complaint. My mom called on day 3. I could hear her crying before she said hello. What happened? Her voice was careful, scared. I told her the truth. Someone made this up. I didn't do anything. She went quiet, then said she and Dad had talked. They thought it was best if I didn't come to Sunday dinners for a while. Just until this blows over. My brother called next. 2 years younger, always the golden child. Attorney. Perfect suburban life. Bro, what the heck? It's not true. Then why are they investigating? Because someone lied. He exhaled. Mom's freaking out. With the kids and everything. We think it's better if you keep your distance for now. I got it. I got that my own family was cutting me loose because I was embarrassing them. I hung up on him. My sister sent a short text. Said she needed space to process. Didn't ask for my side. Just shut the door. Only my dad kept calling. You doing okay? He'd ask. When I said I needed an attorney, he wired me $5,000 the next day. You didn't do this, he said. Not a question. A statement. I know. You're not smooth enough to pull off an affair, and you're too much of a Boy Scout to risk your career. Marin played her role perfectly at first, the devastated wife. But there were cracks. She stopped sleeping in our bed, took the guest room, locked the door. She'd disappear for hours and come back saying she went for a drive. Her phone was a vault. Change the password again. One night I asked her point blank, "Do you believe me?" She didn't even look up from her phone. The screen lit up her face in that cold blue glow. Does it matter? Yeah, it matters. You're my wife. Am I? She finally made eye contact. Because the man I married wouldn't be in this situation. My stomach dropped. You actually think I did something? I think you got yourself suspended. I think you put us in this position. And I think I'm the one dealing with the fallout while you sit here feeling sorry for yourself. Marin, I lost my job. My family won't talk to me. Oh my gosh, enough. She stood up, phone clutched in her hand like a weapon. Do you hear yourself? It's always about you. Your job. Your reputation. Your feelings. What about me? Do you know what people at my office say when I walk by? Do you know how humiliating it is to have a husband under investigation? The words hit like a slap. She'd never talked to me like that before. I don't care. Her voice was ice. Whether you did it or not doesn't change the fact that you destroyed everything. My career is taking hits because of you. People judge. And I'm tired of defending you when I don't even know if you deserve it. I stared at her. This woman I'd been with for 8 years. Married for 5. Planned a future with. She looked at me like I was garbage she couldn't wait to take out. 10 days after my suspension, the notice of investigation finally arrived. Certified mail. I ripped it open standing in my dad's driveway. The complaint had been filed March 14th at 11:47 p.m. through the online Title IX portal. Anonymous. 2 pages. Single-spaced. Detailed. The complaint said a junior named Alina had been uncomfortable with my persistent attention since January. Said I'd emailed her frequently with overly personal questions. Said I'd scheduled advising appointments during unconventional hours. Said I'd suggested meeting off campus to discuss her academic future. Said another student had witnessed me being overly familiar with Alina in my office. It was specific. It was convincing. And it was complete garbage. I pulled up the flash drive with my exported work emails. Searched for Alina's name. Found exactly 11 emails between us spanning 2 semesters. January 14th. Alina asking about credit transfer from community college. My response. 2 paragraphs explaining the process and linking the transfer equivalency database. No frequent emails, no personal questions. Nothing even remotely inappropriate. Next, I pulled my exported Outlook calendar. Found Alina's appointments, January 18th at 2 p.m. and February 8th at 10 a.m., both during my posted advising hours. Both logged in the student system where anyone could see them. Both during the day with other people in the hallway and my door half open because that's how I always did appointments. Credit card statements showed nothing social, nothing off campus. The complaint was fiction, but it was detailed fiction. Whoever wrote it knew enough about my job to make it sound plausible. They knew university terminology. They knew how Title IX investigations work. They knew exactly what to say to trigger an immediate suspension. Marin knew all of this. She'd heard me talk about my job for 6 years. Advising hours, appointment protocols, the kinds of complaints that got people suspended. She worked in HR. She understood investigations, documentation, risk management. She'd told me once about a case at her company where they fired a manager for harassment based on an anonymous tip. Told me how they couldn't take chances even when the evidence was thin. She'd literally given me the playbook. And I hadn't realized she was teaching herself how to use it against me. 3 months into my suspension, after barely speaking to me, I came home to find her sitting at the kitchen table with some guy in an expensive suit. Briefcase open. Papers spread out like they owned the place. The sound of a pen clicking. He was tapping it against his legal pad, probably timing how long it would take me to process what I was seeing. She didn't even flinch when I walked in. Didn't look surprised or guilty or anything. She'd been waiting for me. "This is my attorney," she said. The guy stood up, hand extended. I didn't take it. Marin slid a stack of papers across the table toward me. Didn't say anything else. Just sat there with her arms crossed, jaw set. I looked down. Petition for dissolution of marriage printed across the top in bold letters. "You're divorcing me." Yes. Her attorney cleared his throat. "We've scheduled a mediation meeting at a neutral location next week to discuss practical next steps. This is a standard no-fault dissolution. Given the ongoing investigation and the need for legal and residential clarity, my client believes this is the appropriate course of action. You're divorcing me 3 months after I got suspended." I looked at Marin, ignoring him completely. She leaned back in her chair. "I can't do this anymore. We've been living like strangers. This situation, it's not sustainable." "What situation? You mean me being falsely accused?" "I mean us. This whole thing made me realize we've been broken for a while. I need to protect myself. Protect yourself from what? I didn't do anything. It doesn't matter what you did or didn't do. What matters is what everyone thinks happened. My job is at risk. My reputation. I can't go down with you just because we're married. I felt like I'd been punched. So you're bailing. I'm making a practical decision. This isn't about emotions. It's about survival. She said it so calmly, like she was explaining a business strategy. I talked to a therapist. She helped me see that I need to prioritize my own well-being. A therapist? Yes. She helped me see that staying with you isn't healthy, that I deserve better than being dragged down by your mistakes. My mistakes? Someone filed a false complaint against me. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and her expression shifted, colder. You still don't get it. It doesn't matter if it's true. You're toxic now, professionally, socially, and I'm not going to let you take me with you. Her attorney shifted uncomfortably. The mediation meeting is scheduled for next Tuesday at 2 p.m. You'll receive the location details via email. We recommend you have representation present. I saw where this was going. She'd already set the narrative. Controlling, unhealthy, unsafe. One call to the cops saying she felt threatened, and I'd be the one in cuffs. Didn't matter what actually happened. Didn't matter that I'd never touched her. All that mattered was the story she'd tell, and she knew I knew it. Fine, I said. My hands were shaking. I shoved them in my pocket so she wouldn't see. Her attorney slid a single sheet across the table. This just confirms you received the petition, not the terms, just service. I grabbed a pen from the counter and signed. Proof they got me to touch the trap. That's all it was. My name on a line saying they'd successfully delivered the papers that were about to gut my life. Marin took the paper, glanced at it, and handed it to her attorney without a word. She didn't say goodbye, didn't apologize, didn't even look at me again. Just walked to the guest room and shut the door. Her attorney packed up his briefcase, mumbled something about being in touch, and saw himself out. I stood in that kitchen for maybe 5 minutes. Then I went upstairs, threw clothes into a duffel bag, grabbed my laptop and charger, and walked out. Locked the door behind me out of habit even though it didn't matter anymore. Drove to my dad's place. 40-minute drive. He answered the door in his bathrobe, took one look at my face and said, "She did it, didn't she?" I nodded. "You can stay here as long as you need." I slept on his couch that night. Didn't cry, didn't break down, just lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying every word she'd said. I started therapy after I couldn't sleep for 3 weeks. Panic attacks became routine. Within days, my mom called. Said the divorce was probably for the best. That maybe Marin deserved better than this situation. That I needed to take responsibility for my part in all of this. Marin had been talking to her for weeks. I could hear it in the phrasing. The way Mom said, "your part," like she'd been coached. Like Marin had already laid the groundwork, painted the picture, turned my own mother into a character witness for the other side. I stopped answering her calls. My brother texted. Said Marin had reached out to him. Told him I'd been difficult, and she'd finally found the courage to leave. Said he was disappointed in me and needed time to process. She'd gotten to him too, probably months ago. I blocked his number. My sister sent an email, long, detailed, about how she'd always sensed something was off about our marriage, how Marin had confided in her about things I'd supposedly said or done, how she was standing with Marin. The whole family turned, all at once because Marin had spent months setting it up. The only person who didn't abandon me was my dad. He called every morning, asked how I was doing, didn't push when I said I didn't want to talk about it. Just let me know he was there. "You'll get through this," he'd say. I didn't believe him, but I appreciated him saying it anyway. I rented a crappy one-bedroom apartment near the highway. It was depressing as hell. It was also all I could afford. Spent my days applying to jobs I'd never get because a search of my name now returned academic advisor suspended pending investigation. Even places that claimed they didn't do background checks would ghost me after the phone interview. I burned through savings, sat in that awful apartment and asked myself one question on repeat. Who benefits from destroying me? The answer was obvious. Marin. Think about it. If I'm seen as an abuser, or even just professionally inappropriate, she gets the moral high ground in the divorce. Judges eat that up, especially in family court. She walks away looking like the victim who escaped a bad situation. I look like the bad guy who got what he deserved. And she gets favorable terms. Maybe even more than 50-50 if she plays it right. Spousal support, the townhouse, everything. But how the heck do I prove it? I called my attorney. Told him I wanted to subpoena Marin's phone records as part of the divorce discovery. He said that was aggressive, and the judge might not allow it without cause. What if I think she filed the complaint? I asked. Can you prove it? Not yet. Then you're asking for a fishing expedition. Judges hate that. Look, she filed for divorce 3 months after I got suspended. She's calling me controlling and emotionally abusive. She's setting up a narrative. Her credibility is on the table. I need to know what she's hiding. He was quiet for a second. Then, I'll file the motion, but don't get your hopes up. It took 2 hearings and a lot of back and forth before the judge finally granted limited scope. Marin's attorney fought it hard, claimed it was invasive and irrelevant, but my attorney argued that her abuse allegations made her credibility and pattern of behavior directly relevant to the divorce. The judge approved call and text logs only, no message content, for a limited date range. I'm allowing this narrowly, the judge said. Call logs and metadata from March 1st through March 31st. Nothing more unless you show cause for expansion. 2 weeks later, I finally had the records. I spread them out on my card table and started digging. I became the kind of guy who saves PDFs like they're ammo. March 12th, 3 days before I got called into HR. Marin sent 14 texts to a number I didn't recognize. I Googled it. Nothing. Ran it through a reverse lookup service. Nothing. My attorney subpoenaed the subscriber information. It took another 3 weeks to get anything useful. Finally got it. Keaton. Same company as Marin. Same department. I looked him up on LinkedIn. Senior HR business partner. Specialization, employee relations and compliance. The guy who handled investigations and wrote up termination reports. The guy who'd know exactly how to draft a Title IX complaint. I kept digging. The pattern was clear. March 13th, 6 texts. March 14th, 11 texts ending at 11:52 p.m., 5 minutes after the complaint was filed at 11:47 p.m. March 15th, 9 texts starting at 10:30 a.m., 15 minutes before I got called into HR at 10:45 a.m. The timeline was damning, but I needed more. My attorney filed a motion for expanded discovery. We had enough to show a suspicious pattern. The judge allowed us to request Marin's work login metadata, just portal access logs, nothing internal, for the same date range. Her employer fought back with privacy objections. 2 rounds of motions. Finally, the judge narrowed it to public-facing university portal access only and forced them to comply. Found that she'd accessed the university's public website on March 10th, specifically the Title IX reporting portal. Spent 11 minutes on the page. Enough time to read the instructions and figure out how to file anonymously. She didn't file from her work computer, she's not that dumb, but she researched it, probably took screenshots, maybe sent them to Keaton. I went back to the apartment I used to share with Marin, technically still my house until the divorce finalized. She wasn't home. I'd texted her first to make sure. Went into the guest room where she'd been sleeping, looked around for anything she might have left behind. Found an old iPad in the nightstand drawer, the one we used to use for recipes and looking up random stuff. Hadn't thought about it in months. It was a shared household device. We'd both set it up years ago and both had accounts on it. Stayed logged in forever because nobody re-auths on a couch device. I turned it on. Still worked. Still had both our profiles. I called my attorney first. If I find something on a shared device that we both own and I'm logged into with my own credentials, is that admissible? He hesitated. This could go sideways fast. If you access her private account or break any passwords, this becomes a criminal problem. But if it's truly shared and you're using your own login, document everything. Take photos. Preserve the evidence properly. And for the love of everything, don't touch anything you're not supposed to. I logged in under my own account and checked the shared notes app we used to use for grocery lists. Opened notes. Scrolled through grocery lists and to-do reminders. Then I noticed the iCloud photo backup was also shared. Opened photos. Sorted by date. March 14th. Found a screenshot. Timestamp. 11:35 p.m. It was a screenshot of the Title IX portal instructions. The page that explained how to file an anonymous complaint, what information to include, how to make it detailed enough to trigger an investigation. Then another screenshot. Timestamp. 11:38 p.m. This one showed a notes draft. Title. Draft. Review. The text matched parts of the complaint I'd received. Not word for word, but close. Same structure, same phrasing, same fabricated details about late office hours, and overly familiar emails. At the bottom of the note, check with D about wording on the off-campus meeting part. Make sure it sounds specific but not too specific. D. Keaton. My hands were shaking. I took photos with my phone, photographed the iPad screen, Sent them to myself, sent them to my attorney. Emailed them to 3 different email addresses just to be sure. My attorney had me meet him at his office that afternoon with the iPad. He took photos himself, printed them, had me sign an affidavit documenting exactly how I'd accessed the device, and got it notarized that same day. We had her. My attorney filed for expanded discovery in May, requested Marin's work emails and workplace messaging for March 1st through March 31st, specifically communications with Keaton. Her attorney lost his mind, filed an objection claiming it was overly broad, harassing, and a violation of privacy. We went before the judge. Family court. Older guy who looked like he'd seen every dirty divorce trick in the book and wasn't impressed by any of them. Marin's attorney made his case. Said I was on a fishing expedition. Said I was weaponizing the legal process to harass his client. Said there was no evidence linking Marin to any misconduct and I was just throwing allegations around because I was bitter about the divorce. My attorney stood up, pulled out the phone records, showed the judge the timeline. March 12th, 14 texts to Keaton. March 13th, 6 texts. March 14th, 11 texts, with the last one sent 5 minutes after the complaint was filed. March 15th, 9 texts, including one sent 15 minutes before I was called into HR. Then he showed the iPad screenshots.